Welcome everyone to the Art and Graphic Design of TTRPG's panel. This panel is for artists and graphic designers wanting to get into working with TTRPGs and for TTRPG designers and enthusiasts to learn more about how best to work with artists. We have assembled a panel of experts, lovely experts, and they have different experiences and roles working within the TTRPG industry from graphic design and art, character art, that sort of thing, but they'll tell you more about what they all do. So how about you all introduce yourselves, starting with whoever is first on my screen, which would probably be you, Vee.
Hello, my name is Vee Hendro. I freelance as a graphic designer in the TTRPG space. I also do some designing. Um, yeah, so that's what I do. I'm not much of an artist myself, but I do know a lot about the sort of putting together production side of things and how that interacts with both game design and putting together like a book or layout, a project, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's me.
Marvelous. Cool, cool. And Helen, why don't you tell our lovely audience about who you are and what you do?
Hi, I'm Helen. I go by she, they pronouns. I am an artist, illustrator, very multidisciplinary now, but started out primarily in illustration. And I kind of got my start by drawing lots of D&D stuff and then lots of RPG stuff when I started doing more RPG stuff. And so since then, I just was like, all right, this is what I really like to do. Let's try to make that a job, which I think it is a job now. Um, in the most loving word, most loving way, like it's not like a job derogatory, like so it's just a lot of art for people. I especially specialize in sort of character stuff, comic-y sort of things, but a lot of it is has kind of naturally veered towards TTRPG with just my interest in TTRPG. So that's kind of where I'm at artistically.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Helen. And Christina.
Everyone, I'm Cristina. I'm working as a commission character artist. I have been since 2018. And yeah, after all that, I've started deciding to create my own tabletop RPG game and to help out peeps in the industry because I feel like Helen, I started out with drawing D&D characters and I feel like it gave me such a big boost getting into art again and being able to create art for others. And I kind of want to try to give back to the community that brought me into doing what I love so much.
Wonderful. So three sort of like very different approaches, but two similar entry points, which I think is wonderful. So for those artists out there who might not know what kind of work is available in the TTRPG space, what kind of things do you do? You sort of covered that briefly in your introductions, but maybe we might go a little bit more in depth with the kinds of work that's available for artists and graphic designers.
Like the most basic one is obviously like character commission art. So in tabletop RPGs, the thing that differentiates it from video games is that when you go through the character creation phase, it's all in your head. It's all in your mind. It's all written. So you don't really get to see your character until you decide to commission an artist for it to get that visual representation. So there's definitely a big draw for people to get their characters illustrated.
It's kind of like what Christina said, it's very much about kind of bringing to life people's imaginations. And I think having a dialogue about that with someone else can also help inform how you design your character as well. I've definitely found that there are times that people will ask me to design a character, but they don't really know. So they just kind of give me a loose ballpark. So part of that being a character design sort of based artist, you do kind of learn how to interpret and iterate and kind of make things um, out of just very minimal things. It is good to have reference material and stuff, but sometimes it is just vibes, just working
Yeah.
on vibes. But yeah, mostly character design art over here, as I said before. And a lot of, I think I end up falling into a lot of graphic designy sort of stuff, which I'm like I don't, it's not my job, but I think in in being someone who's visual and visually literate, I would probably say you do end up getting asked to do a little bit of everything. So if I'm a bit of a jack of all trades, but my sort of passion is character art and sort of narrative art, especially because love that stuff. But
Amazing.
I think there's a lot of stuff you can do from the graphic design end, from like working with like smaller publishers, maybe it's the first time, to like bigger publishers who also still need a lot of layout work. So, and they will contract out some of those projects. So I've both worked with sort of like Monty Cook on some of those layout projects, and a lot of my passion is working with independents as well, and taking people maybe through the printing process for the first time, and just demystifying that a little bit. And then I think there's also work in things like ancillary graphics, like people do actual play streams and they'll need overlays for OBS or that sort of thing. So you can kind of think broadly: title graphics, title treatments, icon sets. I think there is like a lot of visual production stuff that is available, and kind of making it easy for people to come in and see what you do really helps with that, because then they'll be able to find you for what it is that you want to make and do.
Like I ended up finding someone who wanted me to do box art for their board game and stuff like that. So there's definitely art for those kind of things. And yeah, when you're doing like cards and things like that for like the table stuff.
Yeah, the analog
props.
design. Yeah.
The props, that's it.
The props.
Yeah,
wonderful.
I've done logos and the like kind of more like crowdfunding graphics, social marketing graphics, mock-ups for card games, card related things. So there's a lot of things that you can sort of think and get into, like 3D Blender if you're into that as well. Not that Blender is a whole thing.
But that's another thing people could definitely do inside the art and TTRPG space. Wonderful. If there weren't any more direct thoughts on that, how about we move into our next question, which is, what do you think are some useful technical skills within the RPG scene? Like visual storytelling is more of a harder skill, but like there's some soft skills like client management, that sort of thing.
Client management's fun. It's kind of becomes your job when you are freelance. So if you're working with an actual publisher or an actual party or an agent or something like that, usually they handle a lot of that. But if you're freelance, you kind of have to learn how to do that. So again, being the jack of all trades really does fall into sort of good a good stead, because you do need to kind of practice that a lot. So that's something from emails, which is everyone's favorite thing in the world. So you kind of have to learn how to speak with people, and there's a lot of managing of expectations when it comes to client direct communication as well. So if you are very clear with what you're delivering, this is the sort of thing where you think about, these are my terms of service, these are my terms of use, this is what you need to know on the jump, this is what you agree to by commissioning me. Essentially, by commissioning someone, you are making a contract, even if it's something so basic as just an email like discussion, that still sort of falls into an agreement. So you have to be very, very clear with what you're actually getting asked to do and what they can ask you to do. So things like revisions, things like what you will and won't draw, things, some things like I don't add text to stuff. That's something you have to do, like those sorts of things, because that's a whole different skill set. So I found that managing expectations from the jump is always the best thing. This is just having not done it sometimes, especially when I was newer. It would have saved me a lot of time and money, because ultimately you're charging for your time and your skill, and you don't want to spend all of that in the emails and in the discussion sort of part of it.
I think it does make it funner to work with someone, though, when you have a good working relationship, and that does start with the expectation management and understanding how you're going to work together. For sure. And there's so much like differences in how people are coming into working in a working relationship with you, that it is worth, I think, even if you have your own process, kind of stepping in at the start and being like, what's your working process? How often should we, check in, blah, blah, blah. And by doing that all up front, it kind of like helps define the experience for both parties. And then it's always a bit easier when you have that to go off of. I do think that, like, in terms of like RPG specific like skills that are useful, like knowing a bit about like where your art is going to be or the graphic design that you're doing fit into the whole of the design, the game design is also, and like that angle of it is quite useful as well. Understanding the tone and vibe, obviously, of like the thing that you're doing, but also like if there's any other uses for the art, like is it there to show a class archetype? Is it there to show like a map of play? And then more game designy things kind of creep into that creative process. And so I think if you are working in this place, probably you play a lot of games and that's really useful. But thinking about sort of the game design underlying can really help set you apart from other artists who maybe don't have that passion for TTRPGs, and that's why they're seeking you out specifically.
On that point, just to glom something on real quick, it's good to know the whole context as well, like the whole world. Like, what is the game? Because you told me everything you can about it, so that way you can assure that your stuff's going to interlink and sort of flow with it rather than be a jarring, stark difference.
What about other skills, any technical skills that might be useful for artists moving into the TTRPG scene?
Myself, I studied art. It was pretty much my whole scholastic career was studying art in different forms. So studying, I think, but the point I got to was I studied art, got all the stuff about anatomy, got all the stuff about drawing, got all that sort of stuff down, and then got really bored when it came to the conceptualize, like the actual art part of art. So even doing something like a diploma is good, but also saying that, honestly, there's so much more like free stuff out there that you can draw on, to draw with. So it literally just learning with online resources, because there's just so many of them now. Definitely learning the basics is always good to know, because that's kind of the foundations of all of this sort of stuff. And I think that also applies with graphic design. That applies with everything, really. It's always good to have that period of learning and also acknowledging that you're always learning, but mostly just get that foundation in, do that practice, just keep creating a lot.
Yeah, I second that. And especially like when you're starting out smaller projects that you actually finish and close out, and reiterating is really helpful. I'm the opposite in that I'm self-taught in terms of the graphic design, but there is a lot of really, really awesome online tutorials. And then I went back and did some TAFE learning, but I don't think that it was any more helpful than actually just learning some like a fundamental I made myself like a whole fundamentals course patched together from random things on the internet and tried to cover the basics myself, but then it was just practice, lots and lots of practice over time. That was really helpful in kind of cementing your own style and how it works, how your workflow is with people. And so I think, yeah, practicing a lot, very, very useful, very helpful. I think I did at the start, a lot of the times I tried to do like learning for free in terms of if my friends had projects and that sort of thing going on, and be like, can I practice? Like, can I like draw you a logo or make this sort of thing? And that was helpful to try and get that practice of all the soft skills that we've been talking about, as well as the actual technical skills.
Amazing. Yeah, I love that that particular approach.
Projects especially, yeah. I just made a bunch of projects for myself when I was early in this sort of making a career. So yeah, you just make your own projects until someone says, I want you on my project.
Yeah. And by doing your own project, you're showing off that you can work on a project and finish it off and have stuff on your portfolio.
Finishing stuff is always really good.
Yeah, maybe don't take on, doing all of the art for, a big TTRPG as the first project. That might be a bit much.
Like on the subject of creating your own projects, though, it's like some of the advice I was always given, especially when you're creating a portfolio, is like some people don't know what they want until they see it. So think about the projects that you want to work on and create them so that people can see and imagine. Like if you've created something like a movie poster design, they'll be like, oh my God, I can imagine my characters in that movie poster design. I now want to commission a movie poster design of my characters. So you create opportunities for people to inject their characters into those spaces and go, wow, that's a really cool idea. I want to follow up on that.
Wonderful. And I'm guessing that like applies to things like if there's a particular genre you prefer working in, like if you prefer fantasy, then, do fantasy art. If you prefer horror, create a portfolio with horror stuff in it.
Yeah. And like, again, the subject of like the foundations are so important. Like, I just want to reiterate, like, it's not even just fundamentals for illustration in terms of knowing anatomy, perspective, and getting things to look right, like the forms and structure. But it's also from the graphic design perspective, because I recently went back to uni and one of the classes we did was design fundamentals, and things like that would help your compositions look better, like knowing about hierarchy, shape design, flow, rhythm, all of that you can learn from graphic design can instantly apply to illustration as well to make it a fully cohesive piece.
And it's the same thing with photography as well. I did a lot of
Yes.
photography in my youth. Learning composition and things like that from photography was amazing.
Lighting.
But that's the thing, you can get from all sorts of spaces. You can get all sorts of knowledge from a lot of different places that you can then bring into your practice. So it doesn't have to be, it could be engineering, it could be like nature-based stuff. I don't know, people go outside, but that stuff's going to inform your practice.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So the next thing I want to talk about is probably the BBEG of most artists and anyone in a creative field, and that is imposter syndrome. So what is imposter syndrome, and how does one perhaps not defeat it, but banish it enough that you still get stuff done?
I could go for it. Like, my understanding of imposter syndrome is that it's like you just feel like you're faking it to make it kind of thing. Like, oh no, I'm not that great of an artist. Surely no one likes my art that much. And then the thing that kind of combats it for me is the fact that I literally do have people waiting and lining up to get art from me. So it's like I have that whole, they clearly do like what I'm doing. And I understand from an artist perspective that I'm always learning, but where I'm at currently is a good spot.
And even if you don't have people waiting for you, I think, you know, if you don't have that wait list built up or anything like that, or even if it's your first one and you're like your first time offering commission or like trying to go after a contract or something like that, you can, it's still going to be very there. And I think something Stevie said where it was like, it's not about defeating it. Ultimately, it's just about kind of acknowledging it. Because ultimately, I think for a lot of creatives in these fields, because they're very ill-defined, especially if you're freelancing, it is a bit of faking it until you're there. And so that part is also very important. Like, you know, just getting people's eyes on your stuff is probably the first step. And so once people can enjoy your work, that already is there. People are going to find a merit in it. Something I've noticed with being engaged with community artwork is that it's always going to speak to someone. You're not going to create it and it's going to speak to no one. Somebody's going to latch onto it and be like, oh wow, I see myself in this sort of thing. And that's where it kind of starts. So imposter syndrome for me, she comes and she goes, but she's also like, I would just acknowledge her and I'm just like, that's fine, you're there, it's
Something
okay.
you said, Helen, was that, you know, it's going to appeal to someone, and I think that's really important to acknowledge, is that it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. And if you're creating art that is everyone's cup of tea, chances are it's going to be really, really bland. And
Okay, that's the other thing that really kind of gets me through the imposter syndrome, is making sure I'm creating art that I enjoy. Like, the whole point of being an artist and trying to pursue it as a career is because you love doing it. And as long as I'm creating things that I like, I have to remind, like, I think it's the whole social media thing that's really kind of blown people's perspectives of, are they successful or not? Like, you're relying on that outside source to give you acknowledgement, when it's really like, at first and foremost, it should always be yourself, because you want to do art because you enjoy it. And if everyone else enjoys it, that's great, that's bonus. But the worst thing like that can happen if you put your art out there is what? You won't get a like, you won't get a thing. And it's like, is that going to stop you from doing it? No, you'll just keep making more stuff.
And this is something that I've seen as well from novice people who are just starting out and they're like trying and then they give up really quickly. It's, you know, oh, this didn't get as many likes as I wanted it to, or I spent all this effort on something. And it's like, oh, well, then are you making it for yourself? I think you should be, especially with that early stuff and making that portfolio, it's all about making stuff for yourself, because that's what you're going to get interest in, and people are going to be like, people are going to see if you're passionate about it or not. And if you're not passionate about it, they're going to sort of see through that. I think you have to really create earnestly sometimes.
Yeah, that's where the personal projects are really useful as well. If you're like engrossed in it for a personal interest thing, like do something really fun for yourself that you know you will stick to just because it's interesting to you. And yeah, use that as a jumping off point for for getting your work out there in kind of more a for you way to
Mm.
begin with. I mean, that's what I did. I just started a portfolio. My goals weren't even anything to external in the sense of like when I wanted to put a portfolio out, it wasn't so that other people could see it at that point. It was just so I had a website where my stuff was at. And then I think just over time, as that got more consistent, it was easier. Like the jobs eventually came, but at the start, it's just kind of putting that together for me, and that was, I think, took the sting out of like the pressure of it, because in a way I could put whatever up there because I didn't think anyone was there looking at it yet. I don't know if that works for people, but that's just how it worked for me.
Wonderful. I think that's all really great advice and really helpful. Now, in terms of understanding the role of art and aesthetics in TTRPGs, what do you think people need to know in addition to that when they're thinking about graphics and art?
For me, it comes down to like those basic fundamentals that I think I learned in a lot of visual design and graphic design. It's readability. It needs to be understandable, and you need to be able to know what it's meant to be getting across. It needs to make sense. There needs to be connection to what you're actually supposed to be sort of illustrating there. So having something that's like, oh, you can sort of see a narrative in it immediately, that's pretty good for me. Like being able to have a narrative be obvious without having to look at any words, because a lot of the time pictures are kind of there as a helper for people who have problems with reading.
Yeah.
Also colors and things like that. If somebody is colorblind, it's good to just be aware of like, do I have a lot of definition in my work? Like, do I have a lot of, it's even just like sometimes quickly just going and looking at your piece in black and white and then switching back, because then you can sort of see if like it's going to be legible. So yeah, legibility is a big one for me. And just knowing, especially the context in which it's going to be printed, or if it's going to be digital, the context in which it's going to be published in that way, because that will inform how big you should be doing lines, how, like, even if lines should be involved, how clear and detailed you can be, because if something's going to be printed, there's going to be a DPI, it's going to be printed out, and you need to know about that before you go into a piece and start doing all these tiny, minute little details that are going to get blown out in the print. So yeah, just knowing what purpose it's for, making sure it's readable for people, make sure it's fit to purpose, and stuff like that. Those are always on my mind when I'm taking on a
Helen
job.
would also like to know what sort of paper it's being printed on. And...
Yeah. I love paper.
Gloss or matte.
Even more granular than that. Vee, I suppose accessibility and readability and whatnot is also really important in graphic design.
Yeah.
How do you see that in TTRPGs?
Doing layouts is really interesting as well, because I think a lot of people who do engage a graphic designer or layout artist to do their work aren't necessarily the most visual of people. And so they haven't really thought about those elements when they've written their manuscript, essentially. And I think where, you can add a lot of value as a graphic designer is, one, yes, read what they've got, understand sort of their game and their context, but then also like, if something is better as a sidebar, they've not even considered the idea of a sidebar because they've never even thought about this manuscript visually, then it's really useful if you have that moment with them to be able to, with whoever it is, if they have the time to rewrite and or kind of fit these in, sidebars would be helpful here. Have you thought about having diagrams here and like other features in the text, adding those into it? And yeah, that sometimes includes accessibility and font design and choices and ways to better communicate the text in like a way that marries both the visual elements as well as the kind of just like the words on the page. So I do a lot of go ahead.
So would you say, and I know that this is probably not accessible to everyone, but perhaps engaging a graphic designer slightly earlier in the design process of a game to maybe get that layout thinking a little bit earlier in the design process would be helpful? Or do you see it as being iterative, getting the manuscript and then the layout design as two separate processes?
I think the place where you would most see benefit actually from that is when you're doing a character sheet or something like that. Because I'm in the camp that like I think like character sheets are way better if they've been play tested. And I think having either, if you have the skill just to do like a wireframe, essentially, if you've seen one of those, just to see how that works can be really helpful. But if you're not really that way inclined, having someone who can help you in that process, I think will elevate the character sheets, because people are going to ultimately be playing with that a
That's
lot.
what they're going to be looking at the most.
Yeah, exactly. And actually like having enough space for it, or like in the way that you put together that sheet is going to really impact how your game is being played. So that's where it could be really helpful. With tech stuff, I think it's not as bad. I think it's very, like, in some ways it's easy to like put in text boxes and that sort of thing. And maybe all you need is like a few consulting calls at the beginning. But yeah, anything that you're going to be playing a lot and like actually interacting with could have benefits, I think, with thinking about those, like really designing them and not making it an afterthought.
Yeah, I love that. Let's move on to the second half of our discussion, which is for people who want to engage artists to do things like create character portraits or do graphic design or layout, that sort of thing. Let's start with, for the artists, what are some great examples of art briefs? What sort of things do you like to see in an art brief that someone sends to you? And what is an art brief? Because some people might not even know what an art brief is.
I love a doodle. I love when somebody doodles what they want.
I wish I got more like that.
Oh,
like a redraw this in your style kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I just love it when it's like a stick figure situation of like, I want this character here and here, because it shows that you are concise, you know what you want. It's a much more easier thing to read than a big, essentially an artist brief, which is just a big block of words for the most part. But yeah, that's my own dyslexic level of like, oh my god, draw me your characters, doodle for me. I love it. Otherwise, I love one that's kind of visual. So like I have like a few really great clients that send through just Google Docs with just pictures, almost like collages of like, I think their hair is somewhere like this, and they'll include a few pictures, and then they'll go down and they'll be like, and I think maybe a pose like this, and they'll show like a few different illustrations of that. And so yeah, reference 10 out of 10. Reference, know what you want as well. Knowing what you want is great, because then it's much less iteration on the artist's part, where you have to send back and forth, which is a time-consuming and money-consuming process. So if you're just going in and saying, hey, I want this, then you're like, cool, I'll get back to you with a sketch. And then the process is a much more smoother thing when the client actually does know what they want specifically. Yeah. That's my ramble.
So references, sketches.
Clear and conciseness. Don't think that's a word.
I usually like the art brief, like art briefs come in all shapes and sizes. Like I have legitimately had, yes, numerous pages in a Google Doc sent my way. If people are going to use reference images, I highly recommend acknowledging why you've included the reference image. I've definitely had cases where people include reference images, but they don't exactly call out what part of it they actually like. Like, was it the hair design? Was it the clothing design? Like, you've sent me this gorgeous piece of artwork, but I don't know what I'm actually referencing from it. So acknowledging why you've included it so the artist knows which part to look at. And I think the best way I usually try to explain it as well is, it's like, as an artist, I don't necessarily need the full character's backstory or history, because unless you're wanting me to illustrate their history, it's not relevant to the moment. So I usually like to try and say, like, imagine you're standing there and you're taking a picture of your character in this one instance. What do you want that instance to convey? Are you trying to capture them in a happy mood, or are they in a moment of tragedy? And you kind of build it up from that, like, one scene. Like, what are we seeing and what do you want to see?
I often get my clients to fill out a questionnaire as well, of like, kind of touching on that point of like, what are they feeling this moment? Is this a candid image? All those sort of things. Like, are they active? What's their emotion? Like, what's their expression? And all that sort of stuff, where it's just a little questionnaire that kind of breaks down what the person wants, what the client wants. Because sometimes it is hard, especially if you're not someone who commissions artists often, or you don't really know, kind of, you just really love this person's art and you just want a commission of it. And so that's when it's kind of a bit like, oh yeah, having a questionnaire is absolutely great. So sometimes you can guide an artistic brief quite a bit by getting people to fill out a questionnaire rather than, having them throw whatever at you, because trust me, that can be unhelpful.
Yeah, I
Good
also
to know.
tend to do that, like ask what kind of feelings they want out of, like when someone picks up and reads their book, and they're like, what is it that you want them to feel, and point to other like works that they think makes like kind of fits the bill for them. And then from there, like I try to piece together like what is it that they actually want? Because sometimes that's the hardest part, is like, what do you want? And if they don't have the visual language or the way to talk about that, then you need to find creative ways to get that out of them.
On sort of like that topic, and we've sort of been talking around it a little bit, commercial projects. I mean, some of these are going to be hobbyist projects, like if someone's just getting like their personal D&D characters drawn for for their table or whatever. But some people might be asking for things like book layouts or box art, as Christina mentioned earlier. What is the best way to approach someone with a commercial project pitch?
I was just going to say, like, from my most recent experience, is like have an idea exactly of what you're actually asking, like know what your project is. Like if you're going to ask for box art, like are you going to ask for something that involves like a very detailed background, a singular character, multiple characters? Like know what your scope is and what your idea is, because that way, and also know what your budget is. I know it's like a topic a lot of people try to like avoid and leave to the very end. But if you have a set budget in mind, it could save a lot of back and forth if you just state it from the very beginning, because an artist can just go straight up like, I'm sorry, I can't fall within that range, or they'll try to negotiate and say, I might not be able to do this full piece for you, but I can do this within your budget. And it makes negotiating easier to know where your hard line is.
Always put that tiger on the table first and yell at it, because you do need that money conversation out of the way. And it is the most awkward conversation. People hate it, but especially if you're doing it commercially, commercial jobs have budgets. I set different rates for commercial jobs because I'm like, you have a budget. There's also usually a print involved, which does take into account a lot of copy and edition sort of stuff. Being sort of aware of like what you can ask an artist to do and what you can't ask an artist to do sometimes on the jump. So definitely having that sort of limit of this is how many iterations we're going to do, this is how many revisions we're going to do. That comes from more the artist side of just like, this is how many revisions I'm going to do for you. If any more fees will be incurred, and then it'll be this much per revision. So that is also good with what Cristina said about having clear ideas and clear set goals of what you want. Because yeah, most of the time, commercial jobs, people know exactly what they want. Every commercial thing that I've engaged with, it's been either a very, very loose brief, or it's like, we just want you to create art for us and we're just going to throw money at you to do that, which I'm like, or it's been okay, we need this very specific thing for this exact purpose. We're going to use it here. And so it's just sort of a difference. You can sort of see where those commercial folks tend to have that experience already down. However, with some commercials, it is someone who's doing it for their first time for a board game that they're going to do. So that is most likely going to be a sort of self-publishing sort of situation. So you can be a lot more lenient with the things that you demand of them, I found. As long as you have sort of that writing established, that you're like, okay, look, this is how you're going to use it. This is how many prints are going to be made of it. This is it. And as soon as you exceed that sort of stuff, then we can talk. But otherwise, just from my experience with doing stuff for privately or like indie published things, the success can be middling. So you can't expect them to have a huge amount of money to start off with, and to then also know how much to pay you in royalties and things like that. Oh yeah, and royalties are sometimes a thing. So, it all kind of comes in. It's a big thing, and I actually think that doing research on this yourself, from the artists and also from the perspective of the person commissioning, can be helpful. So there are places like Nava, which is a big online resource and sort of a community for artists. We've also got the Graphic Illustrators Guild, which do actually have things like contracts that you can sort of look over and download and modify to your own needs and things like that. For the most part with the commercial stuff, I'm always just like, let's just agree on what we're doing and agree on how it's going to be used and all that stuff at the jump. Because you want to be respected as the artist as well as on the other side. You want the respect to be going to the client. So yeah, you just don't want to be exploited.
Yeah, it's like you come to that mutual agreement of what the final work will be. And that way it's like no extra add-ons get tacked onto it just throughout the project somehow. It's like, no, we've agreed to this. This is what we're doing. Do you want to add more? We can re-talk after the initial project is done, or we can add it on. Obviously,
negotiations, you know, they're not
Yeah.
scary. Negotiations are so fine. You should not be afraid of having to enter into negotiations with someone,
especially for a commercial project.
Yes, well, negotiations are kind of part of it. So yeah, you just have to, don't be afraid of those big sort of scary words like a negotiation or a contract or something like that, because it is there to protect you and the artist. So it's not a detrimental thing at all. It is probably more safe than just getting an artist on Fiverr and then doing whatever, you know, like it's contracts. Just be okay with these words. They're fine.
And they prevent things like scope creep and that sort of thing. You can be like, no, this is what was in the contract. If you want extra things on this, that's going to be a little bit extra.
And sometimes you do have to like put your foot down and have something to point to.
Yeah,
like,
that contract.
We agreed on 0 features. Yeah, exactly.
Remember, just like that. We said this already. Like,
that reminds me of my office days.
Good.
When you had to do the whole like passive aggressive, like as per my previous email.
Yeah. Oh my god, so many as per the contract, as per the outlines defined previously, and all this stuff. Oh my gosh, but yeah.
But at least from the approaching the artist, I think it's like, be ready to have that conversation. Be ready to know what you need and what you're happy to let the artist or anyone else bringing, like from both sides, right? Like you're trying to build a good working relationship. So that means both understanding yourself and your own needs, and then leaving space where it'll be mutually beneficial if it's easier for them in some places. So yeah, that's super helpful.
I guess from the artistic perspective, I've actually been asked this question in previous interviews where it's like, what if the funding or something like that, well, what this is usually outside of TTRPGs, though I'm sure there is a lot of like ethically dubious stuff happening in TTRPGs, but you don't have to accept them. If you are concerned about like the content you'll be creating, I know that big paycheck can be alluring, but just think about like your own self as an artist and like what you are willing to actually create. Because you know, commercial does seem very good, very lucrative, but then it also can be very exploitative sometimes, especially when it comes to other people buying products. So you just want to make sure that you're like, you know, oh, I feel comfortable doing this. I don't see anything where this contradicts my beliefs, say as a queer person. You know, you don't want to have to deal with something that's like mainline straight stuff. Like you're like, oh, actually, it turns out this like book you're writing about like a man who just like sweeps a woman off his feet and she's just subservient to him. I actually don't want to do that actually. So I'm gonna not. Yeah. You can just say no to those things.
Yeah, being really clear about what your values are as a professional and what you want to put your art and your name to, and having that clear before engaging in commercial projects is probably a great idea. And I think I have one final question, unless other people have other topics they would like to discuss. This is about, you know, where do you meet other artists and designers who are working in the TTRPG space? So what kind of communities are you all hanging out in?
Arc.
I was going to say ARC.
ARC.
Self-plug. Yes.
I mean, yes, obviously ARC. We love ARC. ARC is probably the one that I've had the most engagement with, but I actually met ARC by going to Conquest in 2018, I think.
Conquest, for those who don't know, is a convention.
A local Melbourne convention, really cool, held over the Easter weekend. So it's great for everyone who doesn't want to do church stuff and family stuff. So it's great. You could just get to go and play games. And we
wonder why there's such a high queer percentage attending that convention.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. It was just like I was just there at that first year, and I just got talking to John, and I loved what he was talking about like inclusivity and stuff like that. Because obviously, going to conventions, even just main conventions like PAX and stuff like that, at that point the TTRPG scene was all very not representative of myself and my community. So I found it which is wild because that was just a few years ago, but there's been a big explosion and it's great. However, I definitely found that talking to someone who was like, yeah, I see these goals and such, we're going to try and represent them here. So that's where I fell in love with ARC. So don't even have to be Australian to join it. I know it's the Australian role-playing community, but
Yes. We do have non-Australians in the group, in the
it's great.
Discord server. That's for sure.
And yeah, that's probably the best one that I found the most community in, resource-wise. Just putting yourself out there, tabling at conventions is probably a good one for me because you do meet a lot of folks who come around and they just kind of vibe. You vibe so hard with people at conventions.
Yeah, artist alleys, right? Like I
Artist
think,
alleys.
yeah, because you talk to your neighbors and you see, you can ask questions. Everyone I have ever been around at artist alleys have been super, super generous with their time and resources. And like, the very, very first time I was tabling at a convention, this is very embarrassing. We didn't really know what it meant, and we like showed up there without even like a tablecloth, and someone gave us a tablecloth to use for that convention, and we still use that tablecloth today.
Oh, wow.
So
So
like
wonderful.
they're just such generous and helpful folk out there. And just putting yourself out there, asking the questions, tell them they're interested, you're starting out and you're blah 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 blah. Most people are really happy to give it a chat.
Yeah, even
But
approaching
yeah.
people at tables as well. Like if you don't have the money or the resources or even the stock really to, start up a table of your own, it's always good to just chat. That's kind of the foundation, is networking ultimately. I know people here or there, especially with artists, who are very aloof, I would say, is the kindest way to put it. But most of our time we're spending sitting in our houses drawing, or in our studios drawing. So definitely finding those social communities in which you can kind of get out. And artist alleys are part of that. There's a lot of artistic events that happen around Melbourne and Naarm, which is where I'm from here. And just finding your local community where you are, especially. There can even be little things like studios and little essential like art spaces, creative spaces. I've actually been seeing them popping up a lot in rural areas as well. Just get talking to people, kind of bite that bullet. If you're nervous and shy, just be like, you know what, let's just go, just talk to people, because you're going to learn so much more from a community than you are going to in isolation or in a vacuum. Like, others' experiences is very helpful.
For sure.
Learning from other people's mistakes.
I am such a big fan of that.
Oh, yeah. Asking them, if all else fails, you can ask them about their cats, and then they
everyone
will talk
has
to you for like an hour.
As you were describing artists being aloof whilst also drawing a cat on the canvas was very on point, Helen.
We love to see representation in the workplace.
Sorry, Cristina, you were saying.
Because I only just recently had my first Artist Alley event, which was at Conquest, and I was like terrified throughout the whole thing. I think I was just running on nerves and coffee. But yeah, no, the people next to me were like, we got into chatting like at the end as we were packing up, and we're like, they were so helpful and kind. And they actually ended up telling me about a Discord group called, I love it, it's called Aussie Con Artists. And it's literally just a group where artists who go to all these events, they even, like, the artists even have a section just for them where they can review events to say whether or not it was worth going to, whether it was successful or not, what the vibe was, if there were any issues that occurred during it, and things like that. So it was like, that was such a great resource to be invited into, because I'm just like going through some of the older articles, and it's just like, from an artist perspective, it's not even just the artist alleys, but even them talking about how they set up their shop fronts, how they handle shipping and postage. I recently found out about a thing through that called Incubator, which is at Melbourne Central, which I didn't even know about.
I have opinions on that, but I'm not going to bring that up here.
But it's like finding out these things that you normally wouldn't have known about because you didn't realize the resources were there. It's kind of like, it's really eye-opening. So it's like, no, it's kind of cool to find communities like that to be part of, and then you can share your own experiences as well. Because like you're saying, learning from other people's mistakes. It's like, if you're going to become a freelance artist, look at all those horror stories. Like, how many times do I see on Facebook people going, I got ghosted by like my client. They didn't pay me after I sent the final art. I'm like, this has been going on for 10 years. Why have you not learned from everyone
Deposit.
else?
Always a
Deposits.
deposit. Always deposit.
Do nothing without a deposit.
Exactly. It's like, you see, I love thinking proactively. Like you see those horror stories, even client horror stories, and then just think, how can I mitigate this if it happens to me? Like, how can I stop this from happening to me, and just being proactive about it?
I mean, there's a lot out there. Community is kind of
Facebook.
my favorite thing to be. Not so much on Facebook because I don't interact with Facebook. But it's usually, for me, it's usually a meet space thing. It's usually IRL where you find the community, because then you find those friends. However, I have found really lovely communities in games that I play online. So, like the MMOs that I play online, for instance, I have all these friends that I've had for years thanks to that, and we've kind of grown with our own creative journeys and our own creative careers. And so that's sort of been a nice sort of way to touch base with sort of people who are more consumer aligned. So people who will want your work, rather than like people who are also making work. However, there are really cool people making work from these games. So talking to folks online, friends are community. So ask them for advice too sometimes, even if it's just from a layperson's perspective. Just being able to get that idea is like really, really good. You'll find it in your passions, I found.
Niche things are very useful because like sometimes I have some people who I'm like professional acquaintance. I wouldn't call them friends, but it's because we all work in like RPG layout that we like, hey, you're cool. I see what you're doing there, and then we start an email, and like we know of each other, and then you become kind of mutually acquainted in that way. So yeah, it's helpful finding your niche.
I think so. I think one of the great things about TTRPGs in particular, and I mean, probably less for solo TTRPGs, although one could argue that it's connection to self, is that it's fundamentally about connecting with others. And I think, the idea of finding community, both with, other artists, but also with potential clients or, end users or whatever of the products that you're making or the creations that you're making is super important. And I think in today's, even though we're hyper connected through the internet, we're also very hyper disconnected from everything. So, building those communities is, super important, particularly when you are, freelancing. It can be very lonely at times, very isolating. So making sure that you have those communities is super important. All right. Did anyone have any final thoughts to round out this panel discussion?
Do what you love.
Do what you love.
Do what you love, and there will be other people who end up falling in love with what you do. This
is true.
That is a very important part of, I think, any creative endeavor is like, do you love it? No, then why are you doing it?
It's like you have only yourself to blame.
Yeah. But people are gonna love what you love. Even like the most niche fandoms, people love it. Like don't. I think that was like Dante's Inferno fan fiction. So like, there's people will love anything. As long as it's out there, people will love it.
Are you saying that Dante's Inferno is fan fiction? Because it kind of is.
I know, but there's fan fiction of the fan fiction. I think
this fan fiction goes many layers deep.
I think there's some written in Latin too, so I don't know, like really niche stuff. Like it exists. And it will.
I see you saw the same either YouTube or TikTok that I did about obscure fan fictions.
Yeah. It's just like the whole thing of like the most obscure stuff exists. Don't run from that. If you freaking love like Beyblade and you're like, I'm gonna do all my fan art about Beyblade and then just like have a bunch of Beyblade art, people are still gonna actually, there's probably a real big amount of Beyblade fans out there, but like people are gonna connect with it. Like it's.
Where can people find out more about what you do and if they want to work with you? All of that jazz. Vee, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm on Vee RPG. Oh my God, what is my? Hold on. VeeRPGdesigns.com. VEE RPG Designs, all lowercase.com.
Wonderful.
That is where you can find me.
Sweet. So you can check out the sort of stuff Vee does there, see what sort of things she designs. Excellent. Helen, where can people find you?
I mean, I've got my website and my Instagram, so it's Juimon.com. That's Juimon. I had to read it from the screen because I'm bad at spelling. But Juimon, add a .com on that, and it's a website. And then add an @ to it, and that's my Instagram. That's it.
Nice and straightforward. I love it. And Cristina, where can people find out about you and the work that you do?
Yeah, so my website's actually BespokeCC.com.au. It's actually standing for Bespoke Character Creations, because aside from doing the character illustrations and things like that, I also decided, you know what, people go to conventions to buy fan art and merch of other like IPs, but I learned how to create physical merch for people as one-off. So I can create art with your characters and coasters, trading cards, tarot cards, so custom things like that to like really celebrate your character. So bespoke character creations.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for being wonderful guests on this panel. It has been an absolute delight to chat all things sort of like art and creativity with you all. And yeah, I'll make sure that all of your links to stuff are in the description of this video.
Awesome.
Thank you. Take
Thank
a bite of
you
my
for
cat.
hosting.
Bye, cat.